Flowers. Has anyone ever had an experience like this? I remember being in upstate New York for work and was driving back to the hotel. I was on a particular stretch of road that I didn't have any kind of vegetation around. I got a strong sense of flowers, which felt specifically like roses. About 20 minutes later, my cousin called me to say that our grandmother had just passed away. The only reason it really stuck in my mind was because of a story that my grandmother told me as a kid. She said she was pretty young when her father died. She said that he died from an accident at work. She told me when he died, she remembered that her house was overcome by the smell of flowers. Is this something that's common? If so, what exactly do the flowers represent? I think I lived with a ghost. This is my first time submitting anything. I really love to get some feedback on the weird shit that's happened to me. I apologize for the length. Before we begin, let me say that I've never heard voices or seen anything supernatural before or after this. I've always been a skeptic, and while I love the idea of paranormal activity, I never fully believed it until now. Also, I'm a female, to paint a better picture. Anywho, here's a story of what happened to me in the first place I ever rented. At the age of 21, I moved out of my folks' place and into a cottage in Lake George, New York. The cottage was extremely small and only cost $500 per month. The landlords were older and had decided to turn their summer cottages into year-round rentals. Myself and a few other broke people jumped on the opportunity for cheap rent. It was in November 2012 and very, very cold outside. There were around 5 or 6 cottages on the land, but only 3 of them were occupied. In the middle of the cottages was a fire pit we all shared. It was considered unusual for a young woman to move into this dead town, but I felt like I was up for an adventure. In winter, the entire population is 900 people. Lake George comes alive in summer when 20,000 people flock there to enjoy the waterfront, and for the rest of the year, there are 3 arcades with the electricity shut off, closed mini golf courses, and dim creepy carnival attractions all over the place. My shopping options were the liquor store, one crappy supermarket, a coffee shop, and a small pizza place. Upstate New York in general has a somewhat lonely vibe. My mother and father came up for the weekend to help me move. They stayed at a nearby motel because my new house has no living room, just one bedroom with a queen-size bed. On our first day, we did some errands, unpacked, and stocked my kitchen a little bit. My landlords were very kind and gave me some frozen meals to try. The awesome big bags with Alfredo pasta and shrimp. I felt very welcomed and introduced myself to the employees at the various places around town. Night came quickly and my parents returned to their motel. I was finally alone in my little house, feeling giddy and proud to finally have a place of my own. I burned some sage as a gesture, not really thinking it did anything, but I was glad to finally find a use for it because a friend had given it to me a year before. I jumped into bed and watched some TV, drank some tea, shut the TV off, and fell asleep. Early in the morning, probably not yet 7 a.m., I heard loud footsteps on my porch. The footsteps were not rhythmic at all, if that makes any sense. It sounded like someone was tripping or ballet tap dancing in heavy boots. I kept my eyes closed, too sleepy to care because I figured it was my parents coming over. I heard the front door open and shut, and some more awkward footsteps. My parents are super friendly and would have said something by now, and while I was too tired to think logically, I became extremely frightened. The following events happened in the span of 5 minutes, too fast for me to comprehend. I was awakened by those footsteps on my porch, heard the door open and shut, more footsteps now indoors. I finally opened my eyes slightly and could see my entire house from where I was lying in bed. The house was empty. Panicked, I slammed my eyes shut again and pulled my blankets higher. Shortly after, I felt something hit me. I call it wind, but it was more like energy, like a heavy blanket had been draped over me. I got balls to open my eyes again, only to close them almost immediately. I felt like I was looking through some plastic wrap, as if some kind of clear plasma was an inch from my face. Then the whispering started, a quiet, female voice. "Hey, you have to." Incomprehensible babbling. I stayed as still as possible and refused to open my eyes again. Around 30 seconds passed, and the heavy blanket sensation slowly slipped off of me to the right. There was a window to my right side, and to this day I think the thing, whatever it was, exited out that window. I waited 10 more seconds to make sure it was gone, then grabbed my cell phone and called my mom. My mom was surprised that I was already awake around 7:30. As soon as I heard her voice, I burst into tears and tried to explain what had just happened. Still very shaken, she reassured me and came over. We ate breakfast and had another nice productive day. I'd almost forgot about my morning and felt silly for getting so scared. I figured it was some kind of night terror, I guess, even though I never had one before. My dad returned home, but my mom decided to stay one more night with me and have a sleepover. Looking back, she was probably a little freaked out about my experience and wanted to spend the night to make sure everything was okay that night. My mom and I shared my queen-size bed. I was really glad to have her there, and I was totally sure that nothing would happen. We went to bed early while I stayed up on my laptop for a bit. Then I turned it off and rolled over, trying to sleep, but I wasn't super tired. About 15 minutes later, my mom started talking. She was talking in her usual tone, saying something mundane like, "We should do some more shopping tomorrow." Only when I turned to look at her, she was fast asleep. The mundane phrase continued for like 2 more sentences, but her eyes were closed and her mouth was not moving. I was filled with a little bit of what the fuck, but since it was her voice and it was saying things she'd normally say, I wasn't really scared. I figured since it was dark, maybe her mouth was moving, but I just couldn't see it. I decided not to tell my mom about the incident, because at this point, I didn't want her to worry about me living there anymore. She returned home to my dad and my sister multiple hours away. I was now officially alone and went about my business. On my third night, I heard pots and pans rattling in my kitchen. Instead of being afraid, I was ticked off. I thought something like, hey, okay, this place may be haunted, but that's not that. If that is a thing, it's my house still. I got out of bed, turned on the light, and stood in the center of the kitchen area. "Leave me alone! Leave me alone!" I said in a stern voice. I felt totally ridiculous, but hey, no one was there to judge me. Feeling semi-satisfied with myself, I went to sleep. For the next 2 months, nothing else happened, besides occasional banging in the kitchen. I commuted a lot to Glens Falls, the closest town. I made friends with my next-door neighbors, a small family of 3. We built fires nightly and smoked a little weed. I bonded with her 7-year-old daughter and let her keep my hat with bunny ears that she loved. We all jumped in the lake on New Year's Day, known as the Polar Bear Plunge. The snow got deeper and deeper. Sometime close to March, I decided I was done living out there because I had found a much better place for $650 in a busy college town. It was fucking awesome. 1-bedroom apartment, and I was tired of freezing my ass off. My parents were driving out the next day to help me move. I still didn't have a car, still don't. On my last day in Lake George, I was washing dishes. Suddenly I heard a loud sound. I walked into my bedroom to see the wall-to-wall carpet flooded. Water was gushing out of the pipes under my bathroom sink. I didn't know what to do. It kept getting worse and worse and then stopped. I laughed at my bad luck and soaked it up with all my towels. I'm pretty easygoing about things. That laughter suddenly became sobs of anguish. To this day, I'm not sure what triggered it, except the first thing that popped into my head was, I didn't say goodbye. I never said goodbye to the ghost girl and she's pissed. I was crying heavily, whimpering, I'm sorry. In the morning, I buried a cool-looking rock under the cottage as a parting gift. I still have no idea if I was really living with a ghost, but it felt like the right thing to do. That and I didn't want whatever it was to follow me. Now, I've never experienced anything like this before or since. My mother and I hung out in her motel room and watched the news. The morning I was moving out, I told her about my pipes and about how I felt like I was living with some type of spirit. And I felt like it was trying to get my attention last night, so I would say a proper goodbye. My mother suddenly got serious. This is what she said. I didn't want to say anything to you at the time, because you were already scared after your first night sleeping there. The night I slept over with you, I had a horrible nightmare. I dreamed that I was looking at my bare arms, but I could see through my skin into all the arteries. There was a strange substance flowing through me, like some type of clear plasma pumping through my veins. I felt like something was invading my body. So I told her about how she was talking to me that night. My experiences working at a NYC hotel. I'm currently a steward at a hotel in New York, located close to Midtown. Unfortunately, I signed an agreement when when I got hired, saying there are certain things about where I work that I'm not allowed to share or explain in detail. So I can't say which hotel it is, but I can say that it's a fairly major one, which you can find on any city map, including the ones in the subways. I've been working there for almost a full year now, and I've had my fair share of frightening experiences. It's a relatively small hotel with only 6 floors and rooftop access. We have 2 elevators, and the basement has been converted into a public space as well. The elevators are old and slow though, and people usually use the stairs on either end of the building instead, especially the staff. The building itself is quite creepy, partially because it's an old building, but it has a lot of character and charm too. There are weird architectural choices, which leads to twisting corridors and oddly shaped rooms, and the whole place feels a little like a maze. Let me begin by saying, I'm not the biggest believer in the world. I am relatively on the fence. Even after all the things I've seen, some of it could be chopped up to be being sleep deprived. I work long hours, shadows, the fact that the building is old, etc. I also can't say for sure that anything experienced by my coworkers is 100% accurate, either as stories frequently get warped and embellished after several retellings. But with that all in my mind, here's what I got. My first few months of working at the hotel were relatively calm and normal. I put in a lot of hours and volunteered to stay late and work special events like a Halloween party we had. Around my 3rd month, I started to get to know some of my coworkers a little better, and they let me in on some of their experiences that they have in the building. One girl, who has worked there for 3 years, said that while she was sleeping in one of the empty rooms, if you worked an abnormally long shift or have to be here again quickly the next day, they allow us to do that sometimes. She awoke when she heard someone whispering her name in her ear. She said she didn't feel a breeze or breath or anything like that, but the voice was so incredibly close, it may as well have come from her pillow. She tried to go back to sleep, but before she could settle in, she heard the voice again. She immediately left the room and spent the rest of the night in the stewarding office. When it was light, she came back up to get her things and left. The same girl also reported another story. Just before I started working there, the hotel did some renovations on the 6th floor. If you were walking on the 5th floor, you could frequently hear construction noises. There was still one office open on the 6th floor while the renovations were going on, but otherwise the only people allowed up there were the construction crew. The girl said that while she was working on the 5th floor throughout the day, one day she noticed that the construction noise was much louder than usual. She heard excessive knocking, banging, hammering, etc. At the end of her shift, 11 p.m., she went up to the office to drop something off and mentioned in passing to someone working in the office that the construction crew had been really loud that day. The person working in the office looked at her puzzled and told her that the construction crew hadn't been there all day. Other staff members told me countless stories like these. Things falling over when no one was around, weird noises, doors opening and closing on their own, shadows moving down the hall, etc. I didn't believe any of it. I thought they were just trying to sort of haze me or something as an initiation to the group by telling me all these ghost stories. One night, I was working on the 3rd floor, searching a room for a misplaced item. The previous guest had already checked out, so I was the only one in the room. Towards the front of the room, there's a small area where there's a wall with a window in it. In most rooms, that section is a closet, but this room was too small for that, so they just left the wall with the mirror and put a plant behind it for decorations. As I turned around to leave the room, I jumped, because there was a little girl on the other side of the window, in front of the plant. I've been positive that there was no one in the room when I had entered, and the door had actually closed behind me. I pulled myself together and smiled at her, then began to walk towards her to ask where her parents were. But as I rounded the wall, she was gone. There was no one there. There's only one way in and out of that little section, and I was standing in it, so I know she didn't go that way. I never saw her again after that, either. There's another section on the 3rd floor, which we use as a display room. The room itself isn't big enough for someone to stay in it, so we have some things for guests and tourists to look at it in there. That room is always supposed to remain open, so that people can go in and look around anytime they like. One night, I was working up there and noticed that the door was closed. I went to go open it, to try and open it, but I discovered that it was locked, which is extremely odd, because the only way to lock it is with a key from the outside. I went in and found my boss to let her know that the door was locked, and she went up to try her key but couldn't get it open either. So she got her boss to come up and try his key, but still they had no luck. The next step was to try and jimmy the door open, which we tried to do several times over and over again, over the course of the entire day. But we couldn't get it to open, no matter how hard we tried. The next day, it was me. I was working again, and I happened to notice the door was open, so I poked my head inside. I couldn't give that one up to a jammed knob or something, but when I looked around the room, I saw that everything hanging from the wall was upside down. The mirrors, the pictures, even the clock. Now, I have loads of more stories, and I keep hearing new ones from coworkers every single day. But those are the strangest ones I've heard so far. I actually don't find them particularly scary. Just kind of weird, Anyways, make of them what you will. I myself am still not 100% sure I believe all of it. But there you have what I've experienced in that place. As straightforward as I can give it to